Welcome to the English blog, a blog of English teachers by English teachers for English teachers. We have another exciting episode for you today. I'm PJ.
I'm Christine.
I'm Sarah, and we have a very special guest, Ted Kelley.
Hello, good morning, good day.
Thank
Glad
you
to
for
have
being
you.
here.
Don't forget, at the English blog, we provide customized lesson plans, of course, vlog and blog content related to ESL education. We would love to hear from you guys. Drop us a line at www.theenglishblog.com or send us a message on our Facebook page.
We have a special guest today, my friend and associate, Ted Kelley. And today we are talking about multilingualism, bilingualism, and being a teacher that speaks and teaches more than one language. Special thank you to our radio partner, 90.5 Good Vibes FM in Mindanao. You can check out our episodes here on Facebook on 90.5 Good Vibes FM, as well as YouTube. So be sure to check out their social media, which is linked on our social media. Speaking of which, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, of course, our website, www.theenglishblog.com, all sorts of vlog content, blog content, and please leave us some comments. Let us know if you're a multilingual teacher, if you would like to see more guests, what kind of topics you'd like for us to cover, whatever you want to talk about, we are ready to talk to you.
Ted, we are so excited to have you on the show. And Sarah, since you've brought on Ted to join us for this special episode, would you do us the pleasure of introducing him?
Most certainly. So this is the now world famous Ted Kelley. Ted and I both taught English in France, in Belfort, which is our background today. And since then, Ted is going to be starting a master's degree in applied linguistics for foreign language education at the State University of Missouri. And he's got all kinds of teaching experience, language experience, and I think that you guys will enjoy talking to him today.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I don't know if it's world famous or possibly infamous. I'll leave that up to the people with whom I've crossed paths, but thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. This is awesome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ted. So Ted, what got you interested in language acquisition and language teaching?
Well, I guess my journey in studying foreign language kind of began in high school. I just had a really good French teacher, which was what I was able to take was either that or Spanish. I had more interest in French and just kind of stuck with it through high school and then with my undergrad, and always wanted to learn something that would allow me to travel. And having done what's called a practicum experience where I worked observing and teaching a few lessons at a public high school here in Springfield, Missouri, where I'm from in the United States. Learned of a program, which Sarah and I both did, called the Teaching Assistantship Program in France, which is where the French Ministry of Education hires, I want to say around 1,100 speakers of English, native speakers, that is under the age of about 30, I believe, to come in and sort of be the cultural embellishment in the classroom to language learning. And you work in tandem with, their tenured teachers of English and whatnot to sort of get the kids speaking. The idea with that program is more that, because you're young and because you're a native speaker, the students will be a lot more motivated to talk to you than they would be to talk to, Madame Françoise or whoever. And so started teaching English a little bit there. I did 2 different stints of that. And basically, I feel that language is such a means of independence and a means of autonomy to be able to travel the world and meet people whom you would not otherwise have a chance to meet if you didn't speak their language. And, with English becoming the global lingua franca, I kind of wanted to tap into that. And I figured it would, hopefully do some good for some of these students if you, could motivate them to speak a little bit more. And then getting back after that first stint in France teaching English, I was lucky enough to be able to teach one section of intermediate French at my university. We had a teacher, a professor who was not able to teach one semester. They found out late last minute, and I was kind of the last resort. So that was my teaching experience with French here in the United States. I happened to have been just like the most senior, just the oldest student in the French department at that time. So I was able to teach intermediate French for one semester as well at the collegiate level. And yeah, the two approaches are quite different, teaching your first language versus that second language.
We'll get into that later. But don't sell yourself short, Ted. Ted is also super fluent in French. He's got a great accent. He's got great fluency. I don't think it's just because you're the oldest student. I think it's because you're the best.
Oh, well, thank you. I'd maybe like to think so, but I don't know. It's very kind.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about heritage speakers. I heard that you're particularly interested in heritage speakers. So what exactly are they?
So most commonly, heritage speakers are speakers of a language that is not the dominant language of the society of the country in which they live. Most commonly, they call it a heritage speaker because it mainly, most commonly comes from their family, their parents. So it's the language that's spoken at home, and it's most often, their parents' native language or their family's native language. And so because it's absorbed in such an immersive, familial kind of home context, heritage speakers are just about, from what I understand, perfectly bilingual in that language, the heritage language, as well as the dominant language of the society of the country in which they live. And so it deals a lot with sort of how language is acquired subconsciously as opposed to consciously and actively. And these students can function just as successfully and competently in that heritage language as they can in the dominant language, the native language of the society in which they live. And so I'll be starting a master's program in second language acquisition, applied second language acquisition. I'd like to do some research therein. I still have a very rudimentary knowledge at this point. There's a lot of theories and things that have to do with that conscious versus subconscious, immersive experience of acquiring a language. But I think it's just what really fascinates me about heritage speakers is the ages in which that heritage language is acquired and the subsequent competency in that heritage language that results from when that window is kind of opened to heritage speakers in that heritage language. So I'd like to kind of find out what's going on upstairs in the brain and between the ears, maybe a little bit later. So that's something that really fascinates me.
You said that you're pursuing graduate studies in Missouri, and Sarah told me that you have a particular interest in Missouri French. So do those particular French speakers in Missouri count as heritage speakers? And yeah, what's your thing with that?
Quite possibly. So Missouri is let me think here, eastern border of the state is the Mississippi River. And just a basic synopsis from what I understand is that, French settlers came from Acadia, so the French-speaking regions of Canada, and came down the Mississippi and ended up mostly in Louisiana. You have Cajun and Creole populations there, but along the way, a lot of people stopped. And so along the Mississippi River, the east part of Missouri, you have tons and tons of towns and counties and communities that bear French names. So the big one most people know is St. Louis, Saint Louis, if you're going to be French about it. And you have Saint Geneviève, which was the first settlement, first city in Missouri. And so you had, up until I believe about the early to mid 20th century, you had a community, a town that was called Old Mines in Missouri, where French was spoken, up until the most recent dates. I believe, again, that was early to mid 20th century. Now that population, just as the Cajun and Creole populations in Louisiana, has really tapered off and is really dying. And so there are more so in Louisiana than there are in Missouri, and they might not even exist in Missouri, but there are these revivalist preservation movements for French language. Now, I haven't done too much research or spent any time in this town called Old Mines. I'd have to ask some of my professors coming up here, but it just, yeah, it comes from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I want to say this was like 17th, 18th century pre-colonial America, United States, where these French settlers were coming down the Mississippi River, and it was the traces. It was sort of the last vestige, linguistically speaking, of their influence in settling the region. But again, it's died off so much based on societal reasons, like reasons for cultural homogeny. So English, if you go to school, you got to speak English, and a lot of people were, I know, ridiculed for speaking French. That was certainly the case in Louisiana and the Cajun speaking parts of Louisiana. And I believe it would pretty much be the same story in Missouri, for this Old Mines community. And so it just kind of died off. And now, because language ties so much into identity, because it just encompasses absolutely everything about a people, these preservation and revivalist movements are coming around more so in Louisiana than in Missouri. Again, I'm not even certain that they exist in Missouri relative to, all this heritage and history of French settlers. But yeah, it's something that I believe should be studied and preserved, because language is it's all encompassing. It covers absolutely everything about a culture, a society, a people. And yeah.
That's very interesting. I actually went to college in Louisiana at Tulane University in New Orleans, so I know a thing or two about the history of French
Awesome.
settlers in that area, but I really appreciate that historical context and learned a lot from you. The last question that I have for you is, you've already defined the term heritage speakers. What exactly is the difference between a heritage speaker and a native speaker?
So a heritage speaker it has to do with the society and the country in which they live. You could call them a native speaker. I mean, competence, if we're talking in terms of competence, they are essentially a native speaker of that heritage language, because they get it so naturally, they acquire it so naturally at home, in a home context. But in terms of just defining it and separating it from a native language, I mean, it would, the only way it could bear the name native language is if it was also being spoken in the society in which they live. So for all intents and purposes of competency and production and aptitude of using both languages, it's essentially the same thing, but it just has to do with geography, I suppose.
I have a question too for you, Ted, that I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to.
Okay.
But I know that you're interested in the time when people acquire these languages, specifically these heritage languages. And then, as you mentioned, heritage languages are endangered by homogenization and by really the overall language taking over. So my question is, you may or may not know, in your experience or the bit of research that you've done, do heritage speakers, like, is there a generational issue where like their parents are heritage speakers, so they become heritage speakers, but at what point does it get lost? Like you said, like now I think with French Creole and Cajun, the speakers are just old, they're dying out. So something happened where it didn't get transmitted to the next generation. What happens there? How do heritage languages break down and become lost languages?
I don't have a definitive answer, but I think it's mostly sociocultural. As regions again come together and become more homogeneous, there's a need to homogenize the language. And I think different entities such as schools and governments and things like that, they push it. They actively try and force English, or whatever the native language might be of the society in which these events are taking place. It becomes forced, and thus the heritage language just kind of gets pushed out of the way, or even ridiculed again. So it's mainly sociocultural pressures would be my guess. Yeah, and That's just it causes a lot of culture to die off in the process.
Can I ask one question to Christine and PJ? Are either of you heritage speakers? Do you have a heritage language?
My experience is far more complicated because I'm a product of post-colonialism. So um, my so I have this whole essay that I should actually post on the English blog about why I speak English and why English is my native language, even though I don't live in what is stereotypically considered a native speaking country. Um, and that's because I'm Indian and my grandparents were colonized by the British, and then they actually immigrated to the Philippines as refugees because the Americans were also, well, they don't want to call it colonizing. They prefer the word uh well, I don't know what word they prefer.
Helping, I think.
Yeah,
Spreading
yeah.
democracy.
Oh, yeah, one of those. But they're essentially imperializing, so colonial light, the Philippines. And so when my grandparents came here, they chose the Philippines because it was already an English speaking country, and it would be easy for them to assimilate, essentially. Um, so I feel like my heritage language was eroded long before I got into the picture. Yeah. What about you, Christine?
I have a somewhat similar story, except my family is from the Philippines, and the Philippines, just like India, was colonized but by the Spanish Empire and later colonized, or whatever you want to say it, imperialized by the United States. And Filipinos learned to put like Western culture and like whiteness at the top and associate English with those things. And they prioritize the English language. Most Filipinos who come to the States speak English, and that's the only thing that they speak with their children at home. They're unlike other Asian populations that come to the States, many of whom cannot speak a great deal of English, so they speak their mother tongue to their children, and their children are heritage speakers. But it's different with Filipino speakers, and it's something that I lament. I am not a native speaker of Tagalog. I know a few words and phrases, and I can probably hold a very basic conversation in the language, but that's pretty much the extent of it. I am very similar to PJ. I'm an English speaker, and I know other languages, like I know a bit of Spanish, but that's just because of what I've been taught in school and not has nothing to do with what I've been taught at home.
That's actually a great segue to my question for you, Ted. Um, so I just want to clarify. English is your native language,
Yes, sir.
and when did you start learning French exactly?
Started learning French at the age of 14, just right at the beginning of high school.
Okay. Okay, great. So, is it correct to say that English is your L1 and French is your L2?
Yes, yes.
Great. So, I'd love for you to share with us what that's like for you. So, maybe uh, a comparative analysis or a comparative uh, description of your experience teaching your native language versus your non-native language and how that's been for you. And it's up to you, whatever stands out most for you in that comparison.
Well, counterintuitively to what a lot of people might think, I found it easier to teach French, my L2, than it was to teach English, my L1. Um, and that's because, my L1, just as the case for most everyone with their L1, was just acquired naturally through immersion subconsciously. And so when I was in France trying to teach English, and again, the nature of that job, it was not extremely curriculum based with your responsibilities, and they kind of wanted you to shy away a little bit from just teaching English grammar and things like that. So basically, I just kind of tried to incorporate sort of immersive real world mimicking activities, things like doing skits, letting the students write their own scripts for certain scenarios. I found that was a good lesson because you could kind of modify it based on levels and whatnot. And you can go back and correct, sort of, they can write the script, and then you can go back and edit it and hand it back to them, and they can see, some common errors and things. You can discuss it. But basically, it was, in a sense, a lot more difficult given the constraints and just the parameters of that job to teach English. And because I had not, learned it from a grammar standpoint, so to speak, innately at the beginning, it was a little bit more tricky, a little more touch and go, sort of baptism by fire, and just teaching your L1. And so, but with French, because I had learned it from a grammar standpoint, my teacher and professors I had about two different French professors, and one of whom I worked with for a number of years, about a decade of studying French between. She actually happened to be my high school teacher as well as my professor into the university years. And she was extremely grammar based in her instruction and whatnot. I always tried to sort of categorize that in my brain and digest it as kind of the algebra of language. You put your different pieces together, and you get your result, and you can kind of manipulate your variables, switch it around and see what can change. And so I really latched on to that. And so I essentially, like I said, I was able to teach French just to serve as a last minute kind of fill in, as a last resort. And so all I was doing was just sort of parroting what Dr. Tinsley, my professor, had always done for me in her instruction, which was just, okay, let's play around with these variables, with this grammar and these sentences and whatnot, and we'll see what we can learn. But again, that was a full-fledged teaching experience where I had to teach them grammar. I had to teach them different things of, just how the language functions essentially, and just get them learning, as opposed to just being, that cultural embellishment, which was more so the role of the English teaching assistant when I was in France. And so I found it, because I had learned it from that standpoint, learned my L2, learned French from that standpoint, I was able to then sort of regurgitate it to the students and as best as I could, and hope to gain a little bit more experience with that coming up in the graduate years during my master's degree. I believe I'll be teaching undergraduate French courses, and so I'll definitely be able to develop those skills a little bit more. And
Awesome.
hopefully, yeah.
Awesome.
Just,
It's interesting. I was not expecting that answer, to be honest with you. And so I guess my follow-up question to that is, since you did find it easier to teach French, did the way that you learned French inform the way that you started teaching English at all? Did it influence the way that you taught English as time went on, or was your approach to teaching English, was it still a distinct style, and it did not incorporate some of the ways in which you learned French?
I think learning French certainly played into my understanding of English, I suppose more so from a grammatical standpoint. But again, just the roles of that assistantship job did not require us to really sit down and get into the nitty-gritty details of sort of the grammatical structures and all these lexical fields of vocabulary in different areas and whatnot. But I tried to, in little episodes here and there, little instances and opportunities, sort of introduce some grammatical ideas into my instruction of English. But they were very few and far between, and just limited once again by the nature of that job and the parameters.
My question was actually, sorry to interrupt, but my question was actually, as time went on, as you were teaching English more and more, and French more and more, if that started to come out in your English teaching. And my follow-up question to what you're saying. And I'll just ask it now because this is the last time I want to interrupt you. Um,
It's fine.
is also if some of the things that you were doing teaching English managed to cross over and help you teach French.
Okay.
So yeah.
More so it was the other way around, because I came from doing the English teaching assistantship to immediately the following semester teaching that one section of French. And I did try to incorporate some of those mimicking sort of real life scenario activities into instructing French. I believe I had them give me this was a third semester French course. It was intermediate French 1, I believe, was the level. And so they're learning things like daily routines and stuff like that. So I tried to, in the classroom, I think I set up sort of a home scenario, because they talked about like buying and renting apartments and real estate and things like that, moving around and talking about college life, university life as a student. And so I tried to, in the classroom one day, I tried to set up sort of a mock, I guess, apartment. I had them sort of give me a tour around, like, okay, go through your daily routine. And we have all these expressions like je me lève, I get up, je me brosse les dents, I brush my teeth. And so I had them kind of just like role play through that, just try to like mimic getting a partner, like here's your roommate, introduce them, talk about their routines now. So now we're using second person pronouns as opposed to first person pronouns, things like that. So yeah, it's an experiential approach to learning, I guess, is what my English teaching experience lended to my French teaching experience.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a great idea that we should all steal the next time we teach a unit on routines.
Je vous en prie.
Turn our classrooms into apartments. Sounds great.
Lots of ideas to take home from today's episode.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions for our wonderful guests today? Sarah, Christine?
Not for me.
I think we're okay. And I think we're right on time. And I want to give out, before we say goodbye to everybody, I do want to say, if you're interested in this program that Ted mentioned, TAPIF, Teaching Assistantship Program in France, that's what they call it in the US, but it exists. Unfortunately, it is not open to Philippine nationals. It is open to Indian nationals and other English-speaking countries. So if you're interested in that, we do have a blog post about it. And you can find that on theenglishblog.com. And
one thing I will add to that, it's if you're considering a study abroad experience as you're a student, you can pay thousands and thousands of money, whatever your currency might be, or you can go over there and have a far more immersive and real life experience and get paid to do it, doing the teaching assistantship. So that would be one thing I would campaign for, doing the teaching assistantship.
Yeah, Ted did it in the middle of your undergrad career, didn't you? And then he came back and did it again.
Yes, so it can be done, logistically speaking.
That concludes another episode of the English Blog. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm PJ.
I'm Christine.
I'm Sarah. And Ted, you can sign off.
Ted, thank you very much for having me.
As always, you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, comment section. You can also find us on www.theenglishblog.com, where you can find all sorts of other blog and blog content, including information about the assistantships that I mentioned before. And please, if you have any ideas for future episodes, or you really loved everything Ted had to say and you want to see him back, please leave us a comment. Tell us about your heritage languages, and yeah, just let us know anything else that you want to see or share with the English Blog. Thanks again to 90.5 Good Vibes FM for airing us weekly, and also airing us digitally on their digital radio station. You can find more about that from 90.5's Good Vibes FM online or on their Facebook page. And you can also find them through our Facebook page as well.
Again, guys, don't forget that we provide customized lesson plans, vlog, and blog content related to ESL education. We would love to hear from you, so drop us a line at www.theenglishblog.com, or you can send us a message on our Facebook page. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, and have a wonderful evening, everybody. We're so happy that you joined us this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you. Good night and goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.